The thunderclap split the sky as Lillian Westfield burst through the chapel doors, her white wedding dress billowing behind her like a storm cloud. The gathered townsfolk of Silver Creek gasped collectively as the bride-to-be, moments away from saying, "I do," fled into the downpour of 1878 Colorado territory, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the rain. "Lillian, come back here this instant." Her father's voice boomed from the doorway, but she was already halfway down the muddy street, her expensive satin slippers ruined beyond repair. She didn't care. She couldn't breathe in that chapel, couldn't bear the thought of binding herself to Harold Pemberley, a man 30 years her senior, with cold eyes and colder hands. The wedding feast waited inside a lavish spread that had cost her father a small fortune. Roasted meats, fine wines imported from California, and a 3-tiered cake that had taken Mrs. Donovan 3 days to prepare. It would all go to waste now. Just like the last 3 years of her life, spent being molded into the perfect wife for the town's wealthiest banker. Lillian ran blindly, her vision blurred by tears and rain. The town disappeared behind her as she made her way toward the outskirts, her wedding dress catching on brambles and tearing at the hem. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered until a horse and rider appeared beside her. The man pulled his mount to a halt and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Miss, you'll catch your death out here," came a deep voice, tinged with concern. Lillian looked up through rain-soaked lashes to see a tall figure silhouetted against the stormy sky. He wore a duster and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw and the breadth of his shoulders. "Please," she whispered, "I need to get away from here." The stranger regarded her for a long moment before extending a calloused hand. "You're running from something," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. It wasn't a question. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face's strong features, piercing blue eyes, and a scar that ran along his left cheekbone. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about him that made Lillian's heart stutter. "A wedding," she admitted. "My wedding." The stranger's mouth quirked into a half-smile as he reached for her trembling hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "You're already mine," he said, pulling her toward his horse. "At least until this storm passes. Come on." Lillian hesitated only a moment before accepting his help, allowing him to lift her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away from Silver Creek, she couldn't help but feel that she'd just exchanged one fate for another, equally unknown. "I'm Xander," the stranger said close to her ear as they rode. "Xander Zimmerman." "Lillian Westfield," she replied, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Well, Lillian Westfield, I reckon this is the most unusual way I've ever met a lady." Despite everything, Lillian found herself laughing. "And I've never been rescued by a cowboy before." "First time for everything," he replied, guiding his horse toward a small cabin nestled among the pines. "Let's get you somewhere dry." The cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace occupying one wall and a small table with 2 chairs situated near the single window. A narrow bed stood in the corner, covered with a handmade quilt. It was humble compared to her father's house in town, but there was something instantly comforting about the space. "It's not much," Xander said, lighting a lamp, "but it's dry." "It's perfect," Lillian replied, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must look in her sodden wedding gown. "Thank you for bringing me here." "Can't leave a lady stranded in a storm," he said, moving to stoke the embers in the fireplace. "Especially one running from her own wedding." Lillian sank into one of the wooden chairs, her dress making puddles on the floor. "I couldn't marry him," she said quietly. "I just couldn't." Xander didn't press for details. Instead, he pulled a trunk from beneath his bed and extracted a simple shirt and trousers. "These will be too big, but they're dry. You can change behind that screen while I make coffee." Grateful for his practicality, Lillian took the offered clothing and stepped behind the privacy screen in the corner. Peeling off her wet wedding dress proved more difficult than she'd anticipated. The buttons down the back were small and numerous. "Mr. Zimmerman?" she called after a moment of struggling. "I'm afraid I need assistance with these buttons." She heard his footsteps approach, then felt his presence behind the screen. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they worked the tiny pearl buttons, and Lillian found herself holding her breath. "Almost done," he murmured, his voice closer than she expected. When the last button was undone, he stepped away quickly. "I'll give you privacy now." Once changed into his clothing, which indeed hung loosely on her smaller frame, Lillian emerged feeling somewhat more composed. Xander had his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He had removed his hat and duster, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Thank you," she said, accepting the hot beverage. "For everything." He nodded, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You want to tell me what happened back there?" Lillian sipped her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "My father arranged my marriage to Harold Pemberley, the banker. He's 53. I'm 22. That's quite an age difference." "It wasn't the age," Lillian said, staring into her cup. "It was the way he looked at me like I was property he'd purchased, which I suppose I was. Father owes him a considerable sum." Xander's expression darkened. "So you were payment for a debt?" "A convenient solution to financial troubles," she confirmed bitterly. "I was to be the dutiful daughter and save the family name." Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing against the small windows of the cabin. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Lillian couldn't help but flinch. "You afraid of storms?" Xander asked, noticing her reaction. "No," she replied. "I'm afraid of what happens when this one ends. They'll be looking for me." Xander leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Where would you go if you could choose?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked what she wanted before. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been allowed to think that far ahead." "Well, you've got time to think now," he said, rising to his feet. "You're welcome to stay here tonight. I'll take the floor." "I couldn't possibly put you out of your bed. It's no trouble," he insisted, cutting off her protest. "You've had a difficult day. Rest now, and we'll figure things out in the morning." As night fell, Lillian lay beneath Xander's quilt, listening to the rain on the roof and the occasional crackle from the fire. Across the room, Xander had made a pallet on the floor, his breathing steady and deep. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, she felt oddly safe in this stranger's cabin. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope for something more than the life that had been planned for her. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Lillian awoke to find Xander already up, cooking breakfast over the fire. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the small space. "Good morning," he greeted, sliding eggs onto a plate. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Without pins or ribbons, her long chestnut hair fell loose around her shoulders. "What time is it?" "Just after 7, he replied, handing her a plate. "Eat up. We need to decide what to do with you." The statement, though pragmatic, reminded Lillian of her precarious situation. "They'll be searching for me," she said, her appetite suddenly diminished. "My father won't let this humiliation stand." Xander nodded thoughtfully. "I reckon you're right. Silver Creek isn't big enough to hide in." "I have nowhere to go," Lillian admitted, the reality of her situation sinking in. No money, no possessions beyond a ruined wedding dress. Xander was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "I'm heading to my brother's ranch near Durango," he finally said. "You're welcome to come along if you want. It's 3 days' ride from here, far enough that they might not think to look." Lillian stared at him. "You do that for a complete stranger?" "You're not exactly a stranger anymore," he pointed out with a slight smile. "Besides, I've got business in Durango anyway. It's no trouble to have company on the trail." The offer was both terrifying and exhilarating. To leave with this man she barely knew, to travel to a place she'd never been, it was reckless, possibly dangerous. It was also the first real choice she'd been given in years. "When would we leave?" she asked. "As soon as you're ready," Xander replied. "The sooner we're away from Silver Creek, the better. I need to stop at the general store first, though. You'll need proper clothes for the journey." "I have no money to pay you back," Lillian reminded him. Xander waved away her concern. "Consider it a loan. You can repay me once you're settled." His generosity left her speechless. After a moment, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman." "Xander," he corrected, standing to collect their empty plates. "If we're going to be traveling together, we might as well use first names." 2 hours later, they approached the general store on the edge of town, far from the chapel where Lillian had fled her wedding the previous day. Xander entered first, returning shortly with a bundle of clothing: a simple blouse, riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from both sun and curious eyes. Once changed, Lillian felt more like herself than she had in months. The practical clothing was a far cry from the corseted dresses her father had insisted upon, and she moved with newfound freedom. "Ready?" Xander asked when she emerged from behind the store. Lillian nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "What if someone recognizes me?" "Keep your head down and your hat low," he advised, helping her onto his horse. "We'll be out of town before anyone takes a second look." His confidence was reassuring, and Lillian found herself trusting this quiet, steady man who had appeared in her life like an answer to an unspoken prayer. As they rode out of Silver Creek, she didn't look back at the town that had been her prison for so long. They rode until sunset, making camp beside a small stream. Xander proved to be an efficient companion, quickly establishing their campsite and preparing a simple meal. As they ate by the fire, Lillian found herself studying him more openly than she had before. In the flickering light, she could see that he was perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. The scar on his cheek looked old, and she wondered about its origin but didn't ask. There was a quietness about him that she found comforting. He didn't feel the need to fill silence with empty words. "How did you come to be in Silver Creek?" she finally asked. "You're not from there." Xander poked at the fire with a stick. "I was passing through on my way to my brother's ranch. Been working cattle drives up north for the past few years, but Logan, my brother, needs help with his place." "You've been a cowboy a long time then?" "Since I was 16, he confirmed. "Started as a ranch hand in Texas. Worked my way up. It's a good life if you don't mind the loneliness." "Are you lonely?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. Xander looked at her across the fire, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned to find company in stars and silence." He cleared his throat, changing the subject. "What about you? Have you always lived in Silver Creek?" "No," Lillian replied, grateful for the shift. "We moved there 3 years ago, after my mother died. Father said we needed a fresh start, but really, he was running from debts in Denver." "I'm sorry about your mother," Xander said quietly. "Thank you." She was. Lillian paused, memories washing over her. "She was everything good in my life. After she was gone, Father changed. Or perhaps he was always that way, and she had protected me from seeing it." The night deepened around them as they talked, sharing pieces of their lives. Lillian learned that Xander had lost his parents young and had been raised largely by his older brother. He'd fought briefly in the war, though he didn't elaborate on which side or what he'd seen there. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Denver, her love of books, and her dream of someday seeing the ocean. "You will," he said with conviction when she mentioned this last desire. "There's nothing stopping you now. Except for the lack of money, connections, or any practical skills," Lillian thought but didn't say. Instead, she smiled and nodded, allowing herself to believe him, if only for the moment. Later, Wrapped in the blanket Xander had provided, Lillian lay looking up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. She'd never slept outside before, and the immensity of the night sky both awed and humbled her. "Xander," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. Came his drowsy response from the other side of the now smoldering fire. "Thank you for helping me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along yesterday." There was a pause before he replied. "Get some sleep, Lillian. We've got a long ride tomorrow." The next 2 days passed in a similar fashion: long hours on horseback, brief stops to rest and water the horse, and nights spent beneath the stars. Lillian discovered muscles she hadn't known existed as her body adjusted to the rigors of travel. Despite the discomfort, she found herself enjoying the journey. There was a freedom in this nomadic existence that she'd never experienced before. Xander proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to help set up camp, build a fire, and even identify edible plants along the trail. His quiet competence was reassuring, and Lillian found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the easy way he moved and the quiet strength in his hands. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a rise to see a sprawling ranch nestled in a valley below. Smoke rose from the chimney of a substantial log house, and in the distance, cattle grazed on rolling pastures. "There it is," Xander said, a note of pride in his voice. "Zimmerman Ranch. It's beautiful," Lillian breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. He was taller than Xander, but had the same broad shoulders and dark hair. "Logan," Xander called, raising a hand in greeting. Logan Zimmerman strode toward them, a wide grin splitting his bearded face. "Well, look what the wind blew in," he exclaimed, clapping his brother on the shoulder as Xander dismounted. His gaze shifted to Lillian, curiosity evident. "And who might this be?" "Lillian Westfield," Xander replied, helping her down from the horse. "She's in need of a place to stay for a while." Logan's eyebrows rose, but he smiled warmly at Lillian. "Any friend of Xander's is welcome here," he said, tipping his hat.
"Come on in.
Sarah will be pleased to have another woman around." Inside the ranch house, they were greeted by Logan's wife Sarah, a petite woman with kind eyes and a ready smile. She showed no surprise at Lillian's unexpected arrival, simply setting another place at the dinner table and offering her a spare nightgown and the use of the washroom. "The men can wait for their baths," she declared, shooing her husband and brother-in-law out of the house. "A lady needs her privacy." The luxury of a proper bath after 3 days on the trail was indescribable. Lillian sank into the warm water with a sigh of pure pleasure, washing away the dust and sweat of their journey. By the time she emerged, dressed in the borrowed nightgown with her hair freshly washed and combed, she felt almost human again. Dinner was a lively affair, with Logan regaling them with stories of ranch life and Sarah interjecting with gentle corrections when he exaggerated. Lillian watched the easy affection between the couple and felt a pang of longing for something she'd never had. After the meal, when Logan and Sarah had retired for the night, Lillian found herself alone with Xander on the porch. The night was cool, with 1,000 stars scattered across the velvet sky. "Your brother and his wife are wonderful," she said, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders. "Thank you for bringing me here." Xander nodded, his profile outlined in silver by the moonlight. "Logan's always had a soft spot for strays," he said, a smile in his voice. "And Sarah never turns away someone in need. Is that what I am?" Lillian asked softly. "A stray?" Xander turned to look at her then, his expression serious. "You're a woman who had the courage to choose her own path," he said. "That's not something to be taken lightly." His words warmed her more than the shawl. "What happens now?" she asked. "I can't impose on your family's hospitality indefinitely." "You can stay as long as you need," Xander assured her. "Sarah mentioned they could use help with the household and the garden. You'd be earning your keep." "I don't know the first thing about gardening," Lillian admitted. Or cooking or cleaning or any useful skill, really. You'll learn, Xander said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Everyone starts somewhere. His confidence in her was both touching and terrifying. What if she failed? What if she couldn't adapt to this new life? What if her father found her? As if reading her thoughts, Xander added, "No one will look for you here. You're safe." Lillian nodded, wanting to believe him. "Good night, Xander," she said, turning toward the door. "And thank you again." "Lillian," he called softly as she reached for the handle. When she turned, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I'm glad I found you in that storm." With those words hanging in the air between them, he tipped his hat and descended the porch steps, heading for the bunkhouse where he'd be staying. Lillian watched him go, a curious warmth spreading through her chest despite the cool night air. In the guest room that Sarah had prepared, Lillian lay awake long into the night, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. For the first time in her life, that future was uncharted, unmapped, and entirely her own to determine. The following weeks at Zimmerman Ranch fell into a rhythm that Lillian found surprisingly comfortable. True to Sarah's word, there was plenty of work to be done, and Lillian threw herself into learning with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. Her first attempts at cooking were disasters: bread that refused to rise, stew that burned at the bottom of the pot, biscuits hard enough to serve as doorstops. But Sarah was a patient teacher, and gradually Lillian began to improve. There was satisfaction in creating something with her own hands, in seeing the appreciative expressions when the men returned from a day's work to find a hot meal waiting. The garden became her sanctuary. Under Sarah's guidance, Lillian learned to coax life from the soil, tending to the vegetables with a care that bordered on reverence. The feel of earth between her fingers, the scent of growing things, the miracle of seeing seedlings push through the ground, all of it filled her with a contentment she'd never known before. "You have a gift," Sarah told her one afternoon as they harvested peas. "These plants respond to your touch." Lillian laughed, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I think they respond to your instruction. I would have killed them all in the first week without your help." "You sell yourself short," Sarah replied, her expression thoughtful. "You've adapted to ranch life quicker than I did, and I grew up on a farm." Xander, too, seemed impressed by her transformation. Though he spent long days working with the cattle and repairing fences, he often sought her out in the evenings. Sometimes they would simply sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Other times, he would tell her stories of his travels or listen as she read aloud from one of the books in Logan's small library. They never spoke of Silver Creek or the wedding she'd fled, as if by mutual agreement they'd decided to leave the past behind. Yet Lillian often caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken and her cheeks flush. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Xander found her in the garden at dusk, harvesting the last of the day's tomatoes. "I've been looking for you," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Logan and I rode into town today. Thought you might like something from the general store." From behind his back, he produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Lillian wiped her hands on her apron before accepting it, curious. "What is this?" she asked, carefully unwrapping the package. Inside was a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "I noticed you reading the poetry in Logan's library," Xander explained, looking somewhat self-conscious. "Thought you might like some that you haven't read before." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Lillian's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Thank you, Xander." He ducked his head, a hint of color rising in his tanned cheeks. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," she insisted, stepping closer. "It's the first gift anyone has given me in years that was chosen with actual thought to what I might enjoy." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, a possibility. For a breathless moment, Lillian thought he might kiss her. Instead, He reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I should let you finish your gardening," he said, his voice rough. "Supper will be ready soon." As he walked away, Lillian pressed the book to her chest, her heart racing. The gesture had been simple, yet it spoke volumes about the man who had rescued her that stormy day. Xander Zimmerman was nothing like the men she'd known in her previous life, men who valued women as possessions or ornaments. He saw her, truly saw her, and that realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. That night, after everyone had retired, Lillian sat in the lamplight reading her new book, savoring Dickinson's words about hope and possibility. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Lillian?" It was Sarah's voice. "May I come in?" "Of course," Lillian replied, setting aside the book. Sarah entered, wearing a nightgown and robe, her long blonde hair braided for sleep. She carried 2 cups of tea, offering one to Lillian before settling on the edge of the bed. "I thought you might like some company," she said, sipping her tea. "And perhaps a woman to talk to." Lillian accepted the cup gratefully. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," Sarah assured her. "I just noticed a certain look in my brother-in-law's eyes today. A look I haven't seen before." Heat crept into Lillian's cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Sarah's smile was knowing. "I think you do. Xander's always been the solitary type married to his work, Logan says. But the way he looks at you." She trailed off, studying Lillian's face. "The question is, do you feel the same?" The directness of the question caught Lillian off guard. In the society she'd grown up in, such matters were approached obliquely, with hints and insinuations. Sarah's frankness was both refreshing and disarming. "I hardly know," Lillian admitted after a moment. "Everything in my life has changed so quickly. 2 months ago, I was preparing to marry a man I dreaded. Now I'm here, learning to be someone entirely new. And what do you think of this new person you're becoming?" Sarah asked gently. Lillian considered the question, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I like her," she said finally. "She's stronger than I thought possible. More capable. And happier?" "Yes," Lillian nodded, realizing the truth of it. "Happier than I can remember being since my mother died." Sarah reached out to squeeze Lillian's hand. "That's all that matters then. The rest will sort itself out in time." She rose, collecting both empty cups. "Just know that you're welcome here, for as long as you choose to stay. You've become like family to us." After Sarah left, Lillian lay awake, her thoughts tumbling over each other like leaves in a stream. Family. The word stirred something deep within her, a longing, a hope she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Could she find that here, among these kind, hard-working people? Could she build a life so different from the one she'd been raised to expect?
And what of Xander?
The way her heart quickened when he was near, the comfort she found in his quiet presence, the admiration she felt for his integrity and strength, were these the beginnings of love? Or merely gratitude to the man who had rescued her? As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch's rhythms changed. The days grew shorter, the mornings crisp with frost. There was a new urgency to the work as everyone prepared for the coming winter, preserving food from the garden, repairing buildings, ensuring adequate supplies of firewood. Lillian threw herself into these preparations alongside Sarah, learning to can vegetables, dry herbs, and make preserves. Her hands, once soft and unblemished, now bore the marks of honest labor, calluses, small cuts, nicks from knives and needles. She wore these marks proudly, evidence of her transformation from pampered daughter to capable woman. Xander, too, seemed to notice the change in her. "You belong here," he said one evening as they walked back from checking on a newborn calf. "It's as if you've always been part of this place." "It feels that way sometimes," Lillian admitted, pulling her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. "I can hardly remember the person I was before." "You're still you," Xander said, his voice gentle. "Just more yourself than you were allowed to be before." His insight surprised her. How is it that you understand me so well? Xander was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. I recognize something in you, he finally said. A spirit that refuses to be broken, no matter what life throws at it. Like yours? Lillian asked softly. He smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his features. Maybe. Though I never had to run from my own wedding. They shared a laugh, and Lillian found herself moving closer to him, drawn by the warmth of his presence in the cool evening air. When their hands brushed, neither pulled away. Instead, Xander's fingers closed around hers, a touch both tentative and sure. They walked back to the ranch house that way, hand in hand, neither feeling the need to speak. It was a small gesture, yet it felt momentous, an acknowledgement of something growing between them, fragile but persistent as a seedling pushing through soil toward sunlight. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Lillian woke to find the world transformed, every familiar object rendered new and magical beneath the snow's embrace. She stood at her window, watching as ranch hands moved about their morning chores, their breath fogging in the cold air. A movement caught her eye. Xander, emerging from the bunkhouse, his dark hair dusted with snowflakes. He paused, looking up at her window, as if sensing her gaze. When he saw her, he raised a hand in greeting, a smile warming his features even at this distance. Lillian returned the gesture, a sense of rightness settling over her. This was where she belonged, in this place, with these people with him. Later that day, as she helped Sarah prepare dinner, Lillian found herself humming softly, a half-remembered tune from her childhood. Someone's in good spirits today, Sarah observed, kneading dough for bread. It's the snow, Lillian replied, though they both knew it was more than that. It makes everything look clean and new. Sarah wiped flour from her hands, her expression turning serious. Logan had news from town yesterday, she said, lowering her voice though they were alone in the kitchen. There was a man asking questions about a young woman who matches your description. The knife Lillian was using to chop carrots slipped, nearly cutting her finger. Was it my father? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan didn't recognize the description, but the man said he represented Harold Pemberley. The name sent a chill through Lillian that had nothing to do with the weather. They're still looking for me, she said, setting down the knife with trembling hands. Logan didn't reveal anything, Sarah quickly assured her. Told the man he hadn't seen anyone fitting that description.
But
she hesitated. It might not be safe for you to go into town for a while. Lillian nodded, her earlier happiness evaporating like morning mist. Of course. I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your family. You are our family, Sarah said firmly, crossing the kitchen to grasp Lillian's shoulders. And we protect our own. No one is going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. The conviction in Sarah's voice was comforting, but it couldn't entirely dispel Lillian's fear. She'd been naive to think she could simply disappear, that her father and Harold would eventually give up the search. Harold's pride had been wounded, and her father's reputation tarnished by her flight. Men like them didn't forgive such offenses. That evening, when Xander came in for dinner, Lillian could tell by his expression that he'd heard the news. He was quieter than usual, his gaze frequently finding hers across the table, filled with concern. After the meal, when Logan and Sarah had retired to their room, Xander motioned for Lillian to join him by the fire. Sarah told you about the man in town, he said without preamble. Lillian nodded, staring into the flames. It was only a matter of time, I suppose. We won't let them find you, Xander said, his voice low and fierce. Not unless you want to be found. She looked at him then, struck by the intensity in his blue eyes. What if they do? What if they force me to go back? No one can force you to do anything, he replied, reaching for her hand. Not anymore. You're not alone, Lillian. The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his gaze, they grounded her, calming the panic that had threatened to overwhelm her all afternoon. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words difficult to say aloud. Lillian Westfield, who had fled her own wedding and survived on the trail, who had remade herself as a rancher's helper, admitting fear felt like a failure. "It's all right to be scared," Xander said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about facing it." "How do you always know the right thing to say?" she asked with a small smile. "I don't," he replied, returning her smile with one of his own. "I just say what I believe." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire slowly die down to embers. When Lillian finally rose to go to her room, Xander stood as well, still holding her hand. "Lillian," he said, her name soft on his lips. "I want you to know something." "What is it?" she asked, heart quickening at the look in his eyes. "That day in the storm, when I told you you're already mine," he paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I wasn't claiming you. I was offering protection, a place to belong, if only for a moment." "I know," Lillian said softly. "I never thought otherwise." "Good," he nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Because I would never presume. That is, I want you to know that you're free to choose your own path, whatever that might be." The earnestness in his voice touched her deeply. How different he was from Harold, from her father, men who had seen her as an object to possess, a pawn to be moved according to their will. "What if my path is here?" she asked, barely audible above the crackle of the dying fire. Xander's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Then nothing would make me happier," he said, his voice rough with emotion. For a heartbeat, they stood there, the promise of something more hovering between them like a tangible thing. Then, with gentle deliberation, Xander lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles, a gesture both old-fashioned and profoundly intimate. "Good night, Lillian," he murmured. "Good night, Xander," she replied, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. As she lay in bed that night, Lillian's thoughts were divided between fear of discovery and the memory of Xander's touch. The latter proved stronger, and she eventually drifted to sleep with the sensation of his kiss still warm on her hand. The next 2 weeks passed without incident. The snow continued to fall intermittently, and the ranch settled into its winter routine. Lillian remained at the ranch house, not venturing into town with Sarah on her weekly trips for supplies. Though she chafed at the confinement, she understood the necessity of caution. Xander, meanwhile, seemed to find more reasons to stay close to the house. He repaired items that had been functioning perfectly well, chopped far more firewood than was needed, and offered to help with tasks that had previously been Lillian's domain. His intentions were transparent to everyone, earning knowing smiles from Sarah and good-natured teasing from Logan. "If you split any more wood, we'll have enough to last until next winter," Logan remarked one evening as Xander came in from the cold, his cheeks ruddy from exertion. "Or are you just trying to impress our guest with your manly prowess?" "The axe needed sharpening," Xander replied with dignity, though a flush that had nothing to do with the cold crept up his neck. "Figured I might as well use it afterward." Lillian hid her smile behind her sewing, pretending not to notice the brothers' exchange. But later, when Xander sat beside her on the sofa while she mended one of Logan's shirts, she couldn't resist a small tease of her own. "The house has never been so well maintained," she observed innocently. "It's almost as if someone's trying to prove their worth as a provider." Xander looked up from the book he'd been pretending to read, his expression caught between embarrassment and amusement. "Is it working?" he asked, his voice low enough that Sarah, working on accounts at the table, wouldn't overhear. "Perhaps," Lillian replied, enjoying the way his eyes darkened at her answer. "Though I was already quite impressed by your capabilities, Mr. Zimmerman." A slow smile spread across his face. "Good to know, Miss Westfield." The playful exchange might have continued, but a sudden commotion outside interrupted them. Dogs barking, a horse whinnying in distress, then Logan's voice calling for Xander. Xander was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his coat. "Stay here," he told Lillian, his expression serious once more. But Lillian was already rising, concern overwhelming caution. "What if someone's hurt? I should help." Before Xander could protest further, the door burst open and Logan appeared, supporting a young ranch hand who was bleeding profusely from a gash in his leg. "Fell on some ice and caught his leg on a piece of metal," Logan explained tersely. "Need to stop the bleeding." All thoughts of their previous conversation forgotten, Lillian sprang into action alongside Sarah. They cleared the kitchen table, laying down clean cloths before helping Logan settle the injured man. While Sarah boiled water and gathered bandages, Lillian examined the wound. "It's deep, but I don't think it hit an artery," she said, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. "We need to clean it thoroughly before stitching." Xander appeared at her side, with a bottle of whiskey. "For cleaning," he explained, then with a glance at the pale-faced young man, "and for drinking." Working together, they cleaned the wound, stitched it closed, and bandaged it securely. The young ranch hand Billy, they called him, bore the pain stoically, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his knuckles turned white from gripping the edge of the table. "You'll be fine," Lillian assured him when they'd finished. "But you'll need to stay off that leg for a few days." "No arguments," she added when he began to protest. "Yes, madam," Billy replied, clearly impressed by her authoritative tone. Later, after Billy had been installed in the bunkhouse with strict instructions to rest, Lillian found herself alone with Xander in the kitchen, cleaning up the aftermath of their impromptu surgery. "You were remarkable," Xander said, watching as she washed blood from her hands. "Where did you learn to stitch a wound like that?" "My mother taught me basic sewing when I was young," Lillian replied. "The principle is the same, whether it's cloth or skin." She dried her hands, suddenly exhausted as the excitement of the emergency faded. "Though I'll admit, I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing." "You could have fooled me," Xander said with admiration. "You have a steady hand and a calm head in a crisis. That's rare." His praise warmed her, but Lillian shook her head. "I was terrified the entire time. What if I'd done something wrong? What if the wound becomes infected?" "But you didn't let the fear stop you," Xander pointed out. "You did what needed to be done, despite being afraid. That's what courage is." His words echoed their conversation by the fire weeks earlier. Lillian looked up at him, struck by the consistency of his character, the unwavering belief he seemed to have in her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing strength in me when I don't always see it myself." Xander moved closer, his expression softening. "It's always been there," he said quietly. "From the moment I found you in that storm, soaked to the skin but still determined to forge your own path." Without conscious thought, Lillian reached up to touch the scar on his cheek, a gesture she'd wanted to make since their first meeting. "How did you get this?" she asked, her fingers tracing the silvery line. Xander's eyes closed briefly at her touch. "Bar fight many years ago," he admitted. "I was young and foolish, trying to defend someone's honor who didn't want defending." "And now?" Lillian asked, her hand still resting against his cheek. "Now I'm older," he said, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. Though perhaps still foolish in some ways. There was a question in his eyes, a hesitation that told Lillian he was waiting for permission. Slowly, deliberately, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Xander's arms came around her, drawing her closer. His lips were warm, slightly chapped from the cold air, and they moved against hers with a tenderness that made her heart swell. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day we met," he confessed. "Even when I was bedraggled and hysterical?" Lillian teased. "Even then," he confirmed with a smile. "Though perhaps it wouldn't have been the gentlemanly thing to do at the time." Lillian laughed softly. "No, I suppose not." They might have kissed again, but the sound of approaching footsteps prompted them to step apart, though Xander kept hold of her hand. "Billy's settled," Logan announced as he entered the kitchen, either not noticing or tactfully ignoring their flushed faces and linked hands. "Sarah's given him something for the pain, so he should sleep through the night." "Good," Lillian nodded, trying to collect her scattered thoughts. "We'll need to check the wound in the morning for signs of infection." Logan agreed, then excused himself to check on the other hands before turning in, leaving Xander and Lillian alone once more. "I should get some rest," Lillian said, though she made no move to leave. "It's been an eventful evening." "It has," Xander agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a way that made concentration difficult. "Xander," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "I don't know what happens next." His expression turned serious. "Nothing has to happen that you don't want," he assured her. "That kiss. It doesn't obligate you to anything." "That's not what I meant," Lillian said, squeezing his hand. "I meant that I've never done this before, cared for someone the way I care for you. I don't know how to navigate these feelings." Relief flooded his features. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. "There's no rush." With those words, he leaned down to place a chaste kiss on her forehead. "Good night, Lillian. Sleep well." "Good night, Xander," she replied, her heart full to bursting. As December arrived, bringing with it even colder temperatures and heavier snowfall, life at the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. Billy's leg healed well, thanks to Lillian's care and his reluctant adherence to her instructions to rest. The incident had earned Lillian the respect of the ranch hands, who now tipped their hats to her with genuine deference when she passed. More significantly, her relationship with Xander had evolved into something deeper, more meaningful than she'd ever experienced. They still maintained propriety, their kisses and tender moments saved for private spaces, but everyone at the ranch knew that something had changed between them. Sarah's knowing smiles and Logan's good-natured teasing made that abundantly clear. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Logan cleared his throat in a way that immediately made Lillian suspicious. He exchanged a glance with Sarah before speaking. "So, Christmas is coming," he began, sounding oddly formal. "We were thinking of having a small celebration here at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just some food, maybe some music. Invite a few neighbors." "That sounds lovely," Lillian replied, puzzled by his nervous tone. "The thing is," Logan continued, "some of those neighbors might have heard rumors about a young lady staying with us. People talk, especially in winter when there's not much else to do." Understanding dawned. "You're worried about me being recognized," Lillian said. Logan nodded. "Not that we think anyone would mean you harm," he hastened to add. "But information has a way of traveling." "What Logan is trying to say," Sarah interjected with an exasperated look at her husband, "is that it might be good to have a story prepared about who you are and why you're here." Xander, who had been quiet during this exchange, now spoke up. "I've been thinking about that," he said, setting aside the whittling he'd been working on. "There's a simple solution." All eyes turned to him expectantly. "Lillian and I could marry," he said, his voice calm though his hands betrayed his nervousness, tightening on the piece of wood he held. Then there would be no question about her presence here. The room fell silent. Lillian stared at Xander, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Had he just proposed? In front of his brother and sister-in-law, as a practical solution to a problem? Sarah was the first to recover. "Xander Zimmerman," she said, her tone sharp, "is that your idea of a marriage proposal?" Xander had the grace to look chagrined. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered, shooting a pleading look at Lillian. "That is, I meant it, but not like this." Logan stood abruptly. "I think we should give these two some privacy," he announced, practically dragging Sarah from her chair. "We'll just check on the horses." "The horses are fine," Sarah protested, though she allowed herself to be led toward the door. "They might be cold," Logan insisted, grabbing their coats. Very cold. Might take a while to check on them. All of them. Individually. Once they were alone, Xander moved to sit beside Lillian on the sofa, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "That wasn't how I planned to ask," he said quietly. "I had it all worked out what I would say, where we would be." "You've been planning to propose?" Lillian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xander nodded, taking her hands in his. "For weeks now. I carved this for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden object, a ring, intricately carved from a single piece of wood. "It's not gold or silver, and there's no diamond, but it's beautiful," Lillian breathed, taking the ring and examining the delicate patterns carved into its surface. "Did you make this?" "Yes," he admitted. "I've been working on it every night after you went to bed." The thought of him sitting up late, carefully crafting this gift for her, filled Lillian with warmth. "Xander," she began, but he shook his head. "Let me do this properly," he said, sliding from the sofa to kneel before her. "Lillian Westfield, from the moment I found you in that storm, something changed in me. You brought light into my life that I didn't even know was missing. You're brave and kind and stronger than you know, and I love you more than I thought possible." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "I know we haven't known each other long," Xander continued, "and I know your experience with marriage proposals hasn't been positive. But I promise you this, I will never see you as property or as an obligation. I will honor your strength, support your dreams, and walk beside you rather than ahead or behind. I'm asking you to marry me not because it solves a problem, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Lillian could barely speak through her tears. "Yes," she managed, squeezing his hands. "Yes, Xander, I'll marry you." His face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. With trembling fingers, he took the wooden ring and slipped it onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. "I love you," he whispered, rising to sit beside her once more. "I love you too," Lillian replied, the words new and wonderful on her tongue. Their kiss was deeper than any they had shared before, filled with promise and a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Lillian rested her head against Xander's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When?" she asked, her thoughts already racing ahead to their future together. "Whenever you want," Xander replied, stroking her hair. "Tomorrow, next week, next spring when the snow melts, it's your choice." Lillian considered this. Part of her wanted to wait until spring, to have time to plan and prepare. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since her flight from Silver Creek, urged her to seize happiness now, without delay. "Christmas," she decided, looking up at him. "Let's marry on Christmas Day. It will give us time to prepare, but not so much time that I'll start worrying about all the things that could go wrong." Xander laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest. "Christmas it is," he agreed. "Though nothing will go wrong. I won't allow it." Just then, the door opened a crack and Sarah's voice called, "Is it safe to come back in?" Logan's checked every horse twice and is now threatening to count their teeth. Laughing, Xander called for them to enter. The moment Sarah saw the wooden ring on Lillian's finger, she let out a squeal of delight and rushed to embrace her. "I knew it," she exclaimed, hugging Lillian tightly. "The moment I saw you two together, I told Logan it was only a matter of time." Logan clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "You've found a good woman." "The best," Xander agreed, his eyes never leaving Lillian's face. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of preparations. Sarah threw herself into planning the wedding with an enthusiasm that bordered on mania, insisting that everything be perfect despite the limitations imposed by winter and their remote location. She enlisted the help of neighboring women, who were delighted by the romantic story of Xander finding his bride to be during a storm. Lillian found herself embraced by this community of strong, practical women who had carved out lives in this harsh but beautiful land. They shared stories, recipes, and advice both practical and personal, accepting her as one of their own despite her mysterious background. For his part, Xander seemed to walk on air, his usual stoicism giving way to an almost boyish excitement. He worked tirelessly to ensure the ranch was in perfect order for the wedding, and in the evenings, he and Lillian would sit by the fire, planning their future together. "We could build our own place come spring," he suggested one night. "Logan has offered us a piece of land on the eastern edge of the ranch. Good water, plenty of flat ground for a garden. Our own home," Lillian marveled, leaning against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd have at a place that truly belongs to me." "To us," Xander corrected gently. "Everything I have is yours, Lillian. Everything I am." The depth of his love sometimes overwhelmed her, especially in quiet moments like these. How different he was from Harold Pemberley, who had viewed her as an acquisition rather than a partner. Xander offered not just his name and protection but his heart, completely and without reservation. As Christmas approached, however, a shadow fell over their happiness. 3 days before the wedding, Logan returned from town with troubling news. "That man is back," he told them gravely, stamping snow from his boots in the entryway. "The one asking about Lillian. He's staying at the hotel in town, says he won't leave until he finds her." Fear clutched at Lillian's heart. "Did he say anything more about why he's looking for me?" Logan nodded, his expression grim. "Says you're legally promised to another man. That your father signed a contract." "That's ridiculous," Xander said firmly. "No one can be contracted into marriage against their will." "Unfortunately, that's not entirely true," Sarah said quietly. "If her father made financial arrangements contingent upon the marriage." The implications hung in the air, heavy and ominous. "It doesn't matter," Xander declared, his arm tightening around Lillian's shoulders. "No court or contract will force Lillian to go back to a man she doesn't want to marry." "Of course not," Logan agreed. "But we need to be prepared. If this man is as persistent as he seems, he might not stop at legal means." The thought sent a chill through Lillian. She knew Harold Pemberley well enough to know that his pride wouldn't allow him to simply accept her rejection. And her father, with his debts and desperation, might go to any lengths to deliver her back to her intended groom. "We'll post extra guards," Logan continued. "No strangers approach the ranch without being seen. And Lillian, I'm sorry, but it would be best if you stayed inside until after the wedding." Lillian nodded, understanding the necessity, but hating the return to confinement just when she'd begun to feel truly free. That night, unable to sleep, she slipped from her bed and moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit snow. The beauty of the scene, pristine white fields, pine trees draped in silver, contrasted sharply with the unease in her heart. A soft knock at her door startled her from her reverie. Opening it, she found Xander standing there, his hair tousled as if he, too, had been unable to sleep. "I heard you moving about," he explained in a whisper, conscious of the sleeping household. "Are you all right?" "Just restless," Lillian replied, stepping back to allow him into her room, a breach of propriety that seemed insignificant given their impending marriage. Thinking about what Logan said. Xander crossed to the window, standing beside her to look out at the night. "We won't let them take you," he said quietly, his voice resolute. "I promise you that." "It's not just that," Lillian admitted, turning to face him. "I'm afraid that my past will always follow us, that we'll never truly be free to live our life together without looking over our shoulders." Xander took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "Your past is part of you, Lillian, but it doesn't define you. And it certainly doesn't control your future, our future." His confidence was unwavering, his belief in their ability to overcome this obstacle absolute. Looking up into his face, illuminated by moonlight filtering through the window, Lillian felt her fears begin to recede. "3 more days," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "Just 3 more days, and I'll be your wife." "You've been mine since that stormy day," Xander replied softly. The wedding just makes it official." His words echoed those he'd spoken when they first met, but now they carried a different meaning, not ownership, but belonging, a mutual choice to build a life together. Rising on her tiptoes, Lillian pressed her lips to his, pouring all her love and trust into the kiss. Xander responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I should go back to the bunkhouse," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Stay," Lillian whispered. "Just until I fall asleep." It was another breach of propriety, but one that felt right in the moment. Xander hesitated only briefly before nodding. They settled on the edge of her bed, Lillian's head resting against his shoulder, his arm around her providing comfort and security. In that position, they both eventually drifted to sleep, finding peace in each other's presence despite the threats that loomed on the horizon. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the sun casting diamond sparkles across the snow-covered landscape. Lillian woke early, excitement and nerves making sleep impossible. Today she would become Lillian Zimmerman, wife of Xander, a future she had chosen for herself, built on love rather than obligation. Sarah arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying breakfast and practically bubbling with excitement. "Today's the day," she exclaimed, setting down the tray. "How do you feel?" "Happy," Lillian replied honestly. "Nervous, but in a good way." "That's exactly how you should feel," Sarah assured her, unpacking the dress they had worked on together, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs.
Now eat something.
"We have a busy morning ahead." The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Sarah helped Lillian bathe and dress, arranging her hair in an elegant, upswept style adorned with small white flowers from the greenhouse Logan had built for his wife years earlier. As a finishing touch, Sarah produced a delicate silver necklace with a small pearl pendant. "It was my mother's," she explained, fastening it around Lillian's neck. "Something borrowed for your wedding day." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you for everything. You and Logan have become the family I never thought I'd have again after my mother died." "Oh, hush," Sarah said, though her own eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're making us just as happy by bringing light back into Xander's life." "I've never seen my brother-in-law like this," he smiles. Lillian actually smiles. "Do you know how rare that used to be?" They shared a laugh, broken by a knock at the door. Logan's voice called through. "Are you ladies almost ready? The guests are arriving, and I think my brother might wear a hole in the floor with his pacing." The small chapel they had created in the ranch's main room was simple but beautiful, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles that cast a warm glow over the gathered guests, neighboring ranchers and their families, the ranch hands who had become friends, even the storekeeper from town and his wife. At the front stood Xander, wearing his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face alight with anticipation. As Lillian entered on Logan's arm, he had offered to give her away in the absence of her father. A hush fell over the assembled guests. Xander's eyes found hers across the room, and in that moment, everything else faded away: the guests, the decorations, even her lingering fears about the man searching for her in town. There was only Xander, waiting for her with love shining in his eyes. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the local minister speaking of love, commitment, and partnership. When the time came to exchange vows, Xander's voice was steady and sure, promising to love, honor, and cherish Lillian for all the days of his life. Lillian's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated the words, overcome by the magnitude of the moment. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride." Xander's lips met hers in a tender kiss, sealing their union as the gathered guests erupted in cheers and applause. When they turned to face their friends, now officially husband and wife, Lillian's heart felt so full she thought it might burst from her chest. The celebration that followed was joyous music played on fiddles and harmonicas, dancing, laughter, and a feast that showcased the best of everyone's cooking. Lillian found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, accepting congratulations and advice with equal grace. Throughout it all, Xander remained close, his hand often finding hers as if he couldn't bear to be separated from her. His smile, rare before she had entered his life, now seemed a permanent fixture, lighting his entire face and making him more handsome than ever. As evening fell and the party continued, Logan approached the newlyweds with a conspiratorial smile. "I have a wedding gift for you too," he announced. "Sarah, and I thought you might appreciate some privacy tonight." He pressed a key into Xander's hand. "The old line shack on the North Ridge," he explained. "We've fixed it up, new bed, stocked fireplace, provisions for a few days. It's not fancy, but it's private." Xander clasped his brother's hand, clearly moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Logan. This means a lot." "Just be back for New Year's," Logan replied with a wink. "Sarah would never forgive me if I let you miss her special dinner." As their guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and good wishes, Xander and Lillian prepared for their short journey to the line shack. Sarah had packed a small bag for Lillian, including a nightgown that made her blush when she caught a glimpse of the delicate fabric. The ride to the line shack took less than an hour, the path illuminated by a full moon that turned the snow-covered landscape into a silver dreamscape. Xander led the way, occasionally glancing back to ensure Lillian was managing the unfamiliar terrain. The line shack proved to be a small but sturdy cabin, built to house cowboys working the distant parts of the ranch during Roundup. As Logan had promised, it had been transformed for their use, the rough bunk replaced with a proper bed, the table set with 2 place settings and a bottle of wine, the fireplace laid with wood ready to be lit. "It's perfect," Lillian breathed as Xander lit the lamps, casting a warm glow throughout the small space. "Not exactly the bridal suite at a fancy hotel," Xander said with a touch of apology in his voice. "But it's ours, at least for a few days." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Lillian assured him, moving to stand beside him. "Or with anyone else." Xander's eyes darkened at her words. Slowly, reverently, he reached up to touch her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, as if memorizing every contour. "My wife," he murmured, the wonder in his voice matching the awe Lillian felt at this new reality. "My husband," she replied, the words still strange and wonderful on her tongue. Their kiss began gently, a continuation of the one they had shared during the ceremony, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. Xander's arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest, while Lillian's hands moved up to tangle in his hair, holding him close as if afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I should start the fire," he said, though he made no move to release her. "And bring in our bags." "Yes," Lillian agreed, equally reluctant to end their embrace. That would be sensible. For a moment longer they stood there, lost in each other's gaze. Then, with visible effort, Xander stepped back. "I won't be long," he promised, moving toward the door. While he retrieved their belongings and started the fire, Lillian explored the small cabin that would be their home for the next few days. Besides the main room with its bed, table, and fireplace, there was a small lean-to at the back containing a wash basin and some shelves stocked with supplies. By the time Xander returned with their bags, the fire was crackling merrily in the grate, warming the previously chilly space. He set the bags down near the bed, then turned to find Lillian standing by the fire, her face glowing in its light. "Are you hungry?" he asked, nodding toward the provisions Logan and Sarah had provided. "There's bread, cheese, cold meats." "No," Lillian interrupted softly, extending her hand to him. "Not for food." Understanding dawned in Xander's eyes. He crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her outstretched hand and pulling her gently into his arms. "Lillian," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "Are you sure?" In answer, she reached up to begin unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly but determined. "I've never been more sure of anything," she told him, pressing a kiss to the exposed skin of his chest. What followed was a discovery of each other tender, sometimes awkward, but filled with a love that transcended the physical act. Xander was gentle, patient, guiding Lillian through unfamiliar territory with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath the blankets, Lillian's head resting on Xander's chest, his heartbeat a steady rhythm beneath her ear. The fire cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, and outside, the world was silent beneath its blanket of snow. "I never knew it could be like this," Lillian murmured, tracing patterns on Xander's skin. "That 2 people could be so connected." "Nor did I," Xander admitted, his fingers combing gently through her hair, now loose around her shoulders. "I've never felt this way before, Lillian. Like I'm whole for the first time in my life." They talked long into the night, sharing dreams and memories, making plans for their future together. They would build their own house come spring, Xander working the land while Lillian tended their home and garden. Perhaps children would follow, filling their lives with even more joy and purpose. "I want a daughter with your smile," Xander said drowsily as sleep began to claim them. "And your courage." "And I want a son with your integrity," Lillian replied, nestling closer. "And your gentle heart." They spent 3 blissful days in the line shack, existing in a world of their own creation. They cooked simple meals together, read from the book of poetry Xander had given her, took short walks in the crisp winter air, and made love with an increasing confidence and passion that left them both breathless and amazed. On the morning they were due to return to the main ranch, Lillian stood at the small window, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered hills. Xander's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Ready to go back to reality?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "As long as you're with me," she replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Always," he promised. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." They packed their few belongings and tidied the cabin, leaving it as they had found it. As Xander helped Lillian onto her horse, a wedding gift from Logan and Sarah, neither of them had any way of knowing that the reality awaiting them at the ranch would test that promise sooner than they anticipated. The ride back to the main ranch was peaceful, the winter landscape beautiful in the morning light. Lillian found herself memorizing every detail, the way the sun glinted off the snow, the sound of their horses' hooves breaking through the crust, the occasional call of a bird overhead. These past days had been the happiest of her life, a perfect beginning to her marriage. As they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, however, something seemed wrong. There were too many horses in the yard, and men Lillian didn't recognize standing near the main house. Xander reined in sharply, his expression suddenly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice tense. "Let me see what's happening." "No," Lillian replied, fear coiling in her stomach. "Whatever it is, we face it together. You promised." After a moment's hesitation, Xander nodded. "Stay close to me," he said, nudging his horse forward once more. As they approached the ranch yard, Logan emerged from the house, relief visible on his face when he spotted them. He hurried to meet them, his expression grave. "Xander, Lillian," he greeted them, keeping his voice low. "We have visitors. The man who was asking about Lillian in town, he's brought the sheriff, and some papers he claims give him the right to take her back to Silver Creek." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "Harold is here?" she whispered, her hand tightening on the reins until her knuckles turned white. "No, just his representative," Logan replied. "A lawyer named Jenkins. But he has documents with your father's signature, agreeing to your marriage to this Pemberley fellow." Xander's jaw tightened. It doesn't matter what papers he has. Lillian is my wife now. No court would force a married woman to leave her husband for another man. That's what Sarah and I told them, Logan agreed. But they're insisting on speaking with Lillian directly. The sheriff seems uncomfortable with the whole situation, if that's any consolation. Lillian straightened her spine, a calm determination replacing her initial fear. Then I'll speak with them, she said. I'm not the same person who ran from that wedding. I know who I am now and what I want. Xander looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. Are you sure? Yes, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. It's time to end this once and for all. They dismounted, and with Xander's hand firmly clasped in hers, Lillian walked toward the house. Logan had been right. There were 5 men waiting, including the local sheriff, whom Lillian had met briefly at their wedding. One man stepped forward as they approached, tall, thin, with spectacles perched on a beaked nose and a supercilious expression that immediately put Lillian on edge. This must be Jenkins, Harold's lawyer. Miss Westfield, he began, his tone condescending. I'm relieved to find you alive and well. Your father and Mr. Pemberley have been most concerned. It's Mrs. Zimmerman now, Lillian corrected him firmly. And, as you can see, I am perfectly fine. Jenkins' lips thinned in disapproval. I'm afraid that's a matter of some legal dispute, he said, withdrawing a folded document from his coat. You see, prior to your departure from Silver Creek, your father signed a contract of marriage between you and Mr. Pemberley. That contract is legally binding. I signed no such contract, Lillian pointed out. And I was of age, able to make my own decisions. Nevertheless, Jenkins continued as if she hadn't spoken, under the laws of the Colorado Territory, your father had the right to arrange your marriage, particularly as the arrangement involved the settlement of substantial debts. Sheriff Davis, a stocky man with a weathered face and kind eyes, shifted uncomfortably. Now, Mr. Jenkins, he interjected, I'm not sure that's entirely correct. The lady is clearly married to Mr. Zimmerman here. I performed the ceremony myself on Christmas Day. Jenkins waved away this objection. A marriage that cannot be valid if the bride was already promised to another man, he insisted. The prior contract takes precedence. Xander, who had been listening with growing anger, finally spoke. My wife is not a piece of property to be traded for debt settlement, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She's a person with the right to choose her own husband, which she has done. Your contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. The courts may disagree, Jenkins replied smoothly. But perhaps we needn't involve them. If Mrs. Zimmerman, as she calls herself, would simply return to Silver Creek with me, this matter could be resolved privately between the interested parties. Absolutely not, Xander stated flatly. Lillian stays here, with her husband and her family. Lillian squeezed Xander's hand in gratitude before addressing Jenkins directly. Mr. Jenkins, please convey this message to my father and to Harold Pemberley. I will never return to Silver Creek. I will never honor a contract I didn't sign. And I will never, under any circumstances, consider myself anything but Xander Zimmerman's wife. Her clear, confident voice carried across the ranch yard, causing several of the men Jenkins had brought to look away in embarrassment. Jenkins' face flushed with anger. This is most irregular, he sputtered. Mr. Pemberley will not be pleased. He has invested considerable time and resources in a woman who doesn't want him. Lillian finished for him. Perhaps Mr. Pemberley should consider why he's so determined to marry someone who fled rather than speak vows with him. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. Mr. Jenkins, I think we've heard the lady's position quite clearly. And I must say, I'm inclined to agree with her. No court I know of would force a married woman to leave her husband for another man, contract or no contract. Jenkins looked around at the assembled faces, the sheriff's discomfort, Logan's resolute support, Sarah's fierce protectiveness from the porch where she stood watching, and most significantly, Xander's unwavering determination to stand by his wife. Even the men he had brought, ostensibly to help retrieve Lillian, seemed reluctant to press the matter further. "This isn't the end of the matter," he warned, folding the document with jerky movements. "Mr. Pemberley is not a man who accepts defeat easily." "Neither am I," Xander replied evenly. "Tell Mr. Pemberley that my wife has made her choice, and I will defend that choice with everything I have." There was steel in his voice that made it clear he wasn't referring only to legal defenses. Jenkins must have heard it too, for he took an involuntary step backward. "We'll be leaving now," he announced stiffly, gesturing to his companions. "But this matter is far from resolved." As the unwelcome visitors mounted their horses and rode away, Lillian felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Xander, finding him already watching her with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Yes," she replied, and meant it. "For the first time in my life, I truly am." Later that evening, after the excitement had died down, and they had settled into the small cabin Logan had prepared for them until their own home could be built, Lillian sat before the fire, brushing her hair. Xander watched her from the bed, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked, setting aside the brush. "Harold and my father?" "They might try," Xander admitted. "Men like that don't like being denied what they believe is theirs." "I was never theirs," Lillian said firmly. "Even before I met you, before I found the courage to run, I belonged only to myself." Xander smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "And now?" Lillian rose, crossing to join him on the bed. "Now I belong to myself and to you," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her heart. "Because I choose to, not because anyone decided it for me." "I'll never take that choice for granted," Xander promised, drawing her into his arms. "Every day, I'll try to be worthy of it." "You already are," Lillian assured him, resting her head against his chest. "You were from the moment you extended your hand to a rain-soaked runaway bride and said, 'You're already mine.'" Xander laughed softly, remembering. "Not my smoothest moment," he admitted. "I was just trying to calm you down, let you know you were safe." "It worked," Lillian replied, smiling at the memory. "Though I did wonder what kind of man would claim a complete stranger as his." "The kind who recognized his future when he saw her," Xander said, his voice growing serious. "Even if I didn't know it yet." As they settled into sleep that night, wrapped in each other's arms, Lillian felt a peace she had never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Harold Pemberley or simply the natural difficulties of building a life together, she knew they would face them as they had faced today's confrontation, side by side, drawing strength from their love for each other. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new green growth. True to their plan, Xander began construction on their own home as soon as the ground thawed enough to set foundations. Lillian worked alongside him when she could, learning to use a hammer and saw with the same determination she had shown in mastering cooking and gardening. By summer, their small house was complete, 2 rooms for now, with space to expand as their family grew. Lillian planted a garden even larger than the one she had tended at the main ranch, experimenting with different vegetables and herbs. She also started a small flower bed beneath their bedroom window, filling it with wildflowers transplanted from the meadows. No word had come from Silver Creek since Jenkins' visit, though they remained cautious, never traveling to town alone, and always alert for strangers on the ranch. Gradually, however, the fear receded, replaced by the daily joys and challenges of their new life together. In the fall, as the aspen trees turned gold and the nights grew cooler, Lillian confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She was expecting their first child. Xander's response to the news was everything she could have hoped for: joy, wonder, and a protectiveness that manifested in his insistence on taking over the more strenuous household chores. I'm pregnant, not ill, Lillian reminded him with fond exasperation when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of apples. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most while continuing to work much harder than I do. None of those women were my wife, Xander replied stubbornly, taking the basket from her hands. Indulge me in this, Lillian. Let me take care of you both. His concern was so genuine that Lillian couldn't find it in her heart to argue further. Besides, there was something deeply moving about his devotion to their unborn child, his determination to ensure both their well-being. As winter settled over the ranch once more, bringing with it memories of their meeting 1 year earlier, Lillian found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed. From a reluctant bride fleeing a loveless marriage to a woman secure in her husband's love, building a family and a future of her own choosing, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked one evening, finding her standing by the window, one hand resting on her growing belly. "About storms," she replied, turning to smile at him. "And how sometimes they blow you exactly where you need to be." Xander crossed the room to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his hands covering hers over their child. "I thank God every day for the storm that brought you to me," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "As do I," Lillian whispered, leaning back against the solid strength of the man she loved, the man who had taken her hand when she was lost and afraid, the man who had seen her true worth when she herself had almost forgotten it. Outside, snow began to fall, big flakes drifting lazily past the window. Inside, wrapped in Xander's embrace, Lillian was warm, safe, and profoundly grateful for the courage that had led her to flee her wedding feast and into the arms of the cowboy who had claimed her heart. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a clear spring morning, arriving with a lusty cry that brought tears to Xander's eyes. With her mother's delicate features and her father's blue eyes, she was, in Lillian's admittedly biased opinion, the most beautiful baby ever born. Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys than either of them had anticipated. Sleepless nights gave way to first smiles, first words, first steps. Xander proved to be a natural father, endlessly patient and utterly besotted with his daughter. Watching him rock Emma to sleep or carry her on his shoulders around the ranch, Lillian fell in love with him all over again. As Emma grew from infant to toddler, the house grew as well. Xander added a kitchen extension and began work on a second bedroom, anticipating the day when Emma might have a brother or sister to share the space. The garden flourished under Lillian's care, producing enough food to see them through winter and extra to share with neighbors. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons: planting in spring, harvesting in fall, cozy winters by the fire, and summers filled with the simple pleasures of ranch life. They celebrated holidays with Logan and Sarah, whose own family had grown to include 2 sons. The cousins played together while the adults shared meals and memories, strengthening the bonds that had formed that fateful winter day when Lillian had first arrived at Zimmerman Ranch. On Emma's 3rd birthday, as friends and family gathered to celebrate, a visitor arrived unannounced. Lillian, busy serving cake to the children, didn't notice until Sarah touched her arm and nodded toward the yard, where Xander stood talking to an older man she didn't recognize. "Do you know him?" Sarah asked quietly. Lillian shook her head, watching as Xander's expression shifted from wariness to surprise. "No, but I should go see what's happening." As she approached, Xander turned to her, his face unreadable. "Lillian," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "this man says he has news from Silver Creek." The visitor, gray-haired, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors, removed his hat as Lillian drew near. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he greeted her with a slight bow. "My name is Thomas Green. I was your father's foreman in Silver Creek." "Was," Lillian repeated, picking up on the past tense. Green nodded, his expression solemn. "I regret to inform you that your father passed away last month." Pneumonia, the doctor said. The news was a shock, though not entirely unexpected. Her father had never been in robust health, and the years of financial worry had taken their toll. Still, a complex mix of emotions washed over Lillian's sadness for what might have been, regret for the relationship they'd never repaired, relief that the threat he represented was finally gone. "I'm sorry for your loss," Green continued, seemingly unaware of her inner turmoil. "Your father left instructions that you should be notified of his passing and—" He hesitated, glancing at Xander. "And—" Xander prompted, his hand coming to rest supportively at the small of Lillian's back. "And that you should be informed that Harold Pemberley died 6 months ago," Green finished. "Heart failure, though some say it was the strain of losing his bank in the economic troubles last year." Lillian barely registered the details, focused instead on the essential information both her father and Harold were gone. The shadows that had lingered at the edges of her happiness for 4 years had finally dissipated. "Thank you for bringing this news," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Would you care to join our celebration? It's my daughter's birthday." Green looked surprised by the invitation but accepted with a nod. "I'd be honored, madam. And if I might add, your father spoke of you often in his final days. I believe he regretted his actions, though he never said so directly. It was small comfort, but comfort nonetheless." Lillian led the way back to the gathering, where Emma was being swung between her uncles, her laughter ringing out across the yard. That night, after the guests had departed and Emma was asleep in her bed, Lillian and Xander sat on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Are you all right?" Xander asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "About your father, I mean." Lillian considered the question carefully. "I think so," she replied after a moment. "I mourned the loss of my father years ago, when he made it clear that his debts were more important than my happiness. Today's news just confirms what I already knew." Xander nodded, understanding as always. "And how do you feel about the other news? About Pemberley?" "Relieved," Lillian admitted, feeling no need to pretend otherwise with her husband. "I know it's not charitable to feel that way about another person's death, but it means our family is truly safe now. No more looking over our shoulders, wondering if we'll try again to enforce that contract." "It's human to feel relief," Xander assured her, taking her hand. "And your concern has always been for our family, for Emma. There's nothing wrong with that." They sat in silence for a while longer, each lost in thought. Finally, Lillian turned to face her husband, a soft smile playing at her lips. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day we met?" "Often," Xander replied with a smile of his own. "Especially when it storms. I remember this bedraggled bride, soaked to the skin but still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And I remember a cowboy who appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known how to form," Lillian said, leaning against his shoulder. "Who offered safety when I needed it most." "You know," Xander said thoughtfully, "I almost didn't stop that day. I was in a hurry to reach Logan's ranch before the worst of the storm hit." The thought sent a shiver down Lillian's spine, how different her life might have been if Xander had ridden past, if she had continued running blindly through the rain. Would she have found safety elsewhere? Or would she have been caught, dragged back to the chapel, forced to marry a man she didn't love? "But you did stop," she whispered, grateful beyond words for that simple decision. "Best choice I ever made," Xander replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I didn't realize just how much it would change my life." From inside the house came the soft sound of Emma calling for them, not distressed, just seeking reassurance that her parents were nearby. "Speaking of life-changing decisions," Lillian said with a smile, rising from her seat, "our daughter awaits." As they went inside together to comfort their child, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the frightened young woman fleeing her wedding to the confident wife and mother she had become. It hadn't always been easy, and there had been moments of doubt and fear along the way. But every challenge had been worth it for the life she now had. A life she had chosen. A life with the man who had taken her hand in a storm and claimed her as his own, not as property, but as a partner, equal in all things. A life built on love, respect, and the courage to seek something better than what fate had initially offered. When Emma was settled once more, Xander drew Lillian into his arms, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he began, his fingers tracing patterns on her back, "about adding to our family. Emma's old enough now that she'd enjoy having a sibling." The suggestion sent a thrill through Lillian. "Another baby?" she asked, unable to keep the eagerness from her voice. Xander nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when he was particularly happy. "If you want that too." "I do," Lillian assured him, stretching up to kiss him softly. "Very much." Later, as they lay in bed, planning their future and dreaming of the child they might create, Lillian felt a contentment so complete it bordered on transcendent. This was what happiness felt like, not the absence of challenges or difficulties, but the presence of love so strong it made those challenges worthwhile. The following spring, as wildflowers bloomed across the meadows and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures, Lillian and Xander welcomed their son into the world. They named him James, after Xander's father, and Emma appointed herself his official protector, a role she took very seriously indeed. Life continued to unfold in its beautiful, unpredictable way. The ranch prospered under Xander's management, and Lillian's garden became somewhat famous in the area, with neighbors often stopping by to trade seeds or ask advice. Emma grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength, while James revealed himself to be a thoughtful child with a gentle nature and curious mind. And through it all, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and setbacks that make up a life, well-lived, Lillian and Xander remained each other's steadfast support, their love deepening with each passing year. They never forgot the extraordinary circumstance of their meeting, the courage it had taken for Lillian to flee her wedding feast, or the compassion that had led Xander to extend his hand to a desperate stranger. "You're already mine," he had said that stormy day, words that had proven prophetic in ways neither could have imagined. For they did belong to each other, not through contracts or arrangements, but through the daily choice to love, to support, to build a life worthy of the miracle that had brought them together. And in that belonging, they found the greatest freedom of all.